Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Dynasty Underdog. I'm your host, Uriah Dawkins. With me tonight, again, Billy Beeman and Jake Corbloom at Jake Abrams and at Willie Beeman FF on the Twitter box. How are you guys doing?
Good, man. At Uriah Dawkins on the Twitter box, just
That's
so
right.
everybody knows. But no, I'm
Yeah.
good. I'm sick again, but I have a voice, so I'm here and I'm stoked. I'm ready to go. We have a great show tonight. Honestly, I'm really excited about the show sheet. It's a little more strategic, which I think is like so much better. Maybe for every part of the season, but specifically this part of the season, I think it's way better to get into like the strategy and theory of the game. So I'm stoked, man. How you doing, Jake?
I'm good. I'm wearing plaid. I look like I just came from work because I did just come from work. And yeah, dude, I'm living it up. The only thing I will say before we even jump in, like, can we please abolish Thursday night football? Like, it's truly terrible. I got to watch my own football team play against a rival, a divisional rival, which should be a hyped up game. And by the end of it, I truly never wanted to watch another football game ever again. One, because our two teams unfortunately didn't play particularly well. Two, the officiating was truly terrible. And three, it falls on a Thursday night. Like, for fuck's sake, like, just give me my week. Like, please, you give me now 2 Monday night games. All right, I'm done. I'm off my soapbox.
That that ref crew needs to be fired into the sun, first of all. But you're also talking about it like we didn't just witness that Dolphins Tennessee game on Monday night, and acting like that was something decent. Oh my goodness, that was horrifying to watch. You couldn't. It was like a car crash, like we were talking about. You couldn't even look away. Clad and plaid, right? Corpo soldier, Jesus. AJ, always with the heat on the YouTube comments. Love it. Join us on YouTube, fam. It's great out here. Oh man. and yes, worst game I've ever seen. It was pretty.
It was
pretty
hard
horrific.
to watch, like just the flow of that game with all the red. Like I think I already said, like with the flags, it wasn't even like normally like that one call, and that was like that face mask call was pretty bad.
Mm-hmm.
But like the other ones, the actual call itself didn't even piss me off. Like holding, not holding, whatever. It's like just stop fucking throwing them. Like, I'm tired of this.
Enough's enough. Yeah.
Let them hold. Let them do whatever they're doing. Like I want to watch the game. Like it's terrible.
Oh my god.
But
that
we
Miami game.
We got the dub. We're eating W's. No big deal.
Eating W's.
We give them out for free. We're basically a buffet of dubs for other teams. So you're welcome.
Well, that's cool. You guys took out our entire run defense and pass rush going forward. So thanks for that.
I'm sure there's fans out there that are Giants fans that see that as a win. So to those weird weirdos, congrats to the rest of us who actually care about winning individual weeks. It fucking sucked to lose either way, but I am sorry about that.
Yeah, it's all good. All right, so it looks like we got some Andrews stuff to talk about here. So walking on a tightrope, Mark Andrews' performance, injury, or recovery based. I don't know, man. I saw probably one of the fantasy points data guys, maybe using PFF, one of those guys that like charts or outs and shit. And it seems like Mark Andrews is still pretty active in the route participation. Mm-hmm. He's just not getting the targets. So again, you guys dissect the actual film a little bit better than me. This goes back to last week when we were talking like, explain this to me, what's going on. I have no idea. It just puts me in a situation where like, I feel like I should be trading for Mark Andrews, but he's not really showing me enough that like I want to take that risk. Like these are some serious situations right now that like can really fuck up your team if you do the wrong thing. So
yeah, I mean, fortunately, investing in Mark Andrews right now shouldn't be anything that could mess up your team long term because it's going to be pretty cheap, I'd imagine. So with that in mind, I don't think that there's that much risk involved with Mark Andrews or the acquisition of Mark Andrews. I mean, just look at the. I mean, I don't like to be a box score guy, but all you need to do is look at the box score and see that there's something off with the passing game, and it's been pretty much the entire season. But over the last couple of games, when they can run effectively, they're totally willing to not pass the ball to anybody. Like nobody's getting the football, and obviously Mark Andrews is getting it less than everybody else, but he's also doing a lot of blocking. And I mean, you hear him talk about it. I posted something in the Discord. He expects his involvement in the passing game or his involvement on the offense to develop a little bit more over time this season, I think. But, I think to the topic's point, like he just might not be healthy. Like this is a guy who's coming off of a serious surgery, pretty serious car accident, and so you have to wonder what all goes into that. Could there be some PTSD involved? I mean, obviously he's still playing, so maybe not, but you don't know where these guys' heads are at really. So, I mean, Jake, where was your head kind of at with Andrews and whether you think it's injury or recovery based? Like, what do you think about it?
Yeah, no, I honestly, I liked both of your points. And, to your point first, Billy, Lamar Jackson has a total of 33 passing attempts over the last 2 weeks. It's pretty hard to find targets in an offense like that in general. And, Mark unfortunately had a pretty abysmal drop this past week. That was probably the one thing that everyone will notice, and we'll probably see the tape all over Twitter for the rest of the week. Unfortunately, that's just how it works. But I did want to bring this up in kind of the comparison conversation to that of both Tony Pollard and Darnell Mooney, probably two of the most recent players to have tightrope surgery and kind of see what that general window of recovery looks like. And for Tony Pollard, he spoke about it in the 2023 season that he didn't feel like himself until I believe it was after week 11. So it took him an entire 11 weeks within the NFL season, as well as the entire offseason, for him to basically feel like, quote unquote, himself. I still don't think we actually ever really saw himself. And you're seeing, those little blips, and usually blips are usually negative, but you're seeing these little windows of success for him already this season where he looks almost like his 2022 self all over again. And same thing with Darnell Mooney. I think he truly was a shell of himself. I think Chicago basically gave up on him based off of what they saw from him last season. They obviously improved their wide receiver room as well and got Rome Odunze and Keenan Allen. I'm not saying that, but I do think that there is probably something here that we're not necessarily super conscientious of, maybe because we're not properly educated about it. Because to me personally, this was one of the first times that I had heard of the surgery. I hadn't really heard of it in the past. And maybe we're just not very cognizant of what that recovery time looks like for this surgery specifically. So I just wanted to bring it up and at least just like give us a different landscape of what could be potentially happening aside from scheme, aside from the fact that the quarterback is not technically throwing the ball all that much. So it's really difficult for anyone to perform well, right? Zay Flowers isn't performing well, but no one seems to be like completely like, oh my God, Zay Flowers is absolutely fucked. His career's done, right? Like, why are we thinking this for Mark Andrews specifically? And I think it's just because the production we've seen over a larger window has just basically vanished. I'm just trying to figure out why. And this might be the reason.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. Like the typical recovery time is, 3 to 4 months to improve strength and mobility. And then you're supposed to be wearing a brace for like 6 weeks. And I mean, it's like, this is one of those that these guys come back pretty quickly from, you know what I mean? That's the whole intent of it, is that so you can come back quickly, but still coming back quickly from an injury, there's inherent risk to that. You know what I mean? Like, just there's overall like re-injury risk and obviously slow time to get back to 100%. So I think that's definitely playing a role. And again, he has this major car accident in the midst of like recovery and all that. And I mean, we don't want to like speculate necessarily on that thing, but yeah, you just don't know how much that's all impacting things. Plus, in a new scheme where they're having success running the ball and he's doing a lot of work in the trenches, so it's like he's involved and he's doing the job pretty well. And he's out there running routes, like Uriah said, like the data is showing he's still doing it. He's still getting out there, and they're just not getting the ball to anybody in the passing game. So I'm not convinced that he's done. I'm still in on buying some Mark Andrews, but I know we have a couple options here, like Andrews or Cole Kmet or Andrews or Pat Freiermuth. I'm not there with the Freiermuth one. I mean, Freiermuth is definitely solid floor guy. And, I'm sure he has some upside in the right offense, young, like nothing really wrong with Pat Freiermuth. I don't want to like shit on a guy or anything like that, but I think I'd still take Andrews there. You don't have to. You could probably get Andrews plus for Pat Freiermuth at this point with how this season's gone for him. But Cole Kmet, that one's definitely more of a challenge at this point, I think. Just with his role in an offense and upcoming young quarterback, Keenan Allen won't always be there. I mean, it's worth the conversation. I can see how you can you can buy into Cole Kmet for sure to get off an Andrews. But yeah, so that one's tough for me. I do think that there'd be plenty of people leaning Kmet, and I might be at this point, which I hate. But I don't think I would ever trade Mark Andrews for Cole Kmet. I'm holding my Andrew shares. I'm not doing it. I'm not overreacting. I'm just going to hold. And if anything, I'm buying Andrew shares. But that conversation is a challenge for me, I think. What about you guys?
Yeah, I agree. Just you get to this point where Andrews has fallen so fast, it's almost like you can't keep up, right? Like it's just like 3 weeks ago, this is not even really a conversation, right? Like it's absolutely not a conversation. But like we've now gone through 4 weeks of like, oh my God, Mark Andrews hasn't scored anything, and he's in my lineup, and I can't take him out of my lineup because like what an idiot would I look like by benching Mark Andrews. But then you wake up, it's Monday morning, and you're like, fuck, like it happened again. So it's like it's almost like this whole season is getting me like feeling like there's some like redraft type moves that I feel redrafty, that I want to still stay ahead in some of these leagues or not fall behind with some of these injuries or lack of production. But I don't want to make trades I feel in Dynasty a year ago I wouldn't do, because this is just nuts. But I'm like, I'm starving for points here. Like, and I have guys that should be scoring them. So moving off of Andrews is just something that'd be so freaking hard to do for a Cole Kmet or Pat Frymouth. But I'm with you. If I had to do one of the two, I'd take Cole Kmet. And it's crazy to me that might be an easy like 1-to-1 swap at this point.
That's a great point, dude. I love that you brought up the whole redraft mentality, because Billy and I have been talking about this a little bit via text message over the weekend. And I think that's it. Like, I think we have moved into this sensationalism of needing points immediately because that's how it works in redraft. And I don't know if it's because we have so much crossover now in the Twitter space and other content creation space, where a lot of redraft creators, content creators, and analysts have now moved over into the Dynasty space. But the general logic and strategy by a lot of individual creators, I think, has been incredibly negative towards the way in which we view Dynasty assets, because they are, and I quote, Dynasty assets. So like we even saw it with someone like Marv in week 1. Like, people were freaking out. There were literal content creators who were showing trades where they drafted Marv in the second pick of a super flex startup rookie draft, and not a startup, in a rookie draft, and basically giving him up for relative peanuts. And it just doesn't make sense to me. They're bad omens to start pushing out there. They're bad pieces of information. And in general, I just don't think that we are teaching the right things within a dynasty landscape. That's the way that I've seen it. And I really am glad that you brought that up, because I think that mentality has become almost commonplace now with the way in which we're viewing dynasty assets.
Yeah, and to Uriah's point, in some, or not to Uriah's point, but just, I don't know if this was your point, that's why I'm saying that, but to the point of like
I didn't have a point,
playing it. Yeah, right. To playing it like it's redraft, I do think that there's a space for that with the right build and setup and moves, like specific moves to make that are like redraft mentality that makes sense. I don't want to completely shoot down the idea of that. Like, going for vets is not like a terrible idea in a, where you have a competitive build and, you think you can win this year, and obviously giving up some dynasty value to win. Like, I don't think any of us are saying don't do that, but it's like, when it comes to Mark Andrews, do I really have to trade Mark Andrews to get Cole Kmet? Like, maybe I can just fix my tight end situation without giving up dynasty value. You know what I mean? And let that situation work out and rebound. So we are being super impatient. I mean, I'm thinking back to some conversations we literally had last week about trading Dontavian Wicks for Darnell Mooney. Would you do that today?
Well,
it's impossible to know that Christian Watson injured. Yeah, sorry. Like
Christian Watson was healthy last week.
But shouldn't we bake that in? One injury away, and we know Christian Watson has been injured almost every season.
They're all one injury away, but
yeah, but I mean,
I get what
Yeah.
you're saying. I get what you're saying. Yes.
If over the whole offseason, our evaluation of Dontavian Wicks is he is good enough to be either the guy or the number 2 guy, and we're willing to give that up in 3 weeks while Jordan Love is out and somebody else is playing in for him. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think it was a little bit short-sighted, first, to be honest with you, because he did start producing anyway with Christian Watson on the field, like even with the backup quarterback a little bit, right? So that's one that I was like really thinking about, like, our process on, because like I don't think it's like terrible to make that move. I think both of those guys are going to be maybe relatively successful, but it just made me think, like, it makes me think of kind of how the mentality we're getting into here and how quickly we're willing to kind of move off of our prior evaluations that were, like, when I say prior, like weeks ago, you know what I mean? Not like a year ago. So, yeah.
All right. So let's hop into this, this tweet here by Dynasty Sultan. If you guys are on the Twitter box and you're following a bunch of Dynasty guys, you probably see him on your timeline. Probably a good dude. Never really talked to him, but he said the Chiefs should call Indianapolis about Josh Downs. He could do everything Rashee Rice was doing and more. And I don't have a lot to say about this because I just think it's, again, I think it's just like fodder. But like, yeah, sure. Like, I believe 31 other teams in the NFL should all be calling about every single player on every roster all the time. I think if the phone's not constantly going, you have a really bad front office, right? They should always be looking to upgrade, right? But it's just silly to actually put that out there because it's like, this is not something that someone would have said a while ago. And there's no reason that Indy would need or want to move Josh Downs for anything. So these types of tweets and posts are just, I think, useless. What do you guys got?
No, that's definitely that's a fair conclusion. I think it's, why wasn't this being said weeks ago or in the off season, right? Like, people were definitely hyping up Josh Downs, no doubt, but not saying this, not saying he was the next Rashee Rice, or in the right situation he could be the next Rashee Rice. And then he has an 8-for-8 game. It's just, it goes to the reactionary nature of the space that we occupy. And it's just something that we got to be aware of. Like, I'm not here to shit on Zoltan. He's a smart guy. He does good work. So, but again, there's engagement tweeting. As you get bigger, you're trying to farm those clicks and stuff. So just be careful of what you're taking in, and I don't know, just kind of be discerning with these kind of statements, I think.
In the same vein too, like, we tend to see this type of reaction about situations where two assets are basically moving in opposite directions, and then we try to equate them as equivalent. I mean this with no ill will to Josh Downs. I just don't think that Josh Downs' entire package is equivalent to that of Rashee Rice. And that's coming from someone who still thinks that Rashee Rice is relatively limited. Like, that's not me downing Josh Downs, and it's not me upping Rashee Rice. They're just two different players, and to just kind of conceptualize players as these things that just fit into these roles just because they play in similar positions doesn't mean that they're the same thing, and you can't do the same thing with them. Like, we're not malleable. Like, everyone thinks that we are, but it just doesn't work like that. You don't just pull Josh Downs out of this Indy offense and throw him into the KC offense and he just works. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. So I get the general gist, and I love the point, because I do personally like Josh Downs. This podcast has always been,
I want to buy into that.
Like, I do. I would love to buy into that. I would love for Josh Downs to be on a Joe Flacco offense rather than an Anthony Richardson offense. Like, I would love for him to be in a Patrick Mahomes offense rather than an Anthony Richardson offense, but that's not what we have. And so we have to also adapt. I just think, like, in general, these types of points are only made when kind of the situation stands pat, instead of, like, you know, what Billy's trying to say is, like, this point wasn't being made the first 3 weeks of the season when Rashee Rice was on top of the world, right? So why are we saying it now?
Also, the other thing that I hate doing is not assuming, but like, this tweet is kind of like, hey, like, increase Josh Downs' value a little bit because he could be potentially moved over here. And like, I was talking to somebody about a trade today where it was like, Amari Cooper, could be moved over to the Chiefs or whatever. And it's like, I don't care. He's not on there. He's not on the Chiefs. And I don't want to bet on that. Like, I'm not making a trade with that, included in the evaluation and bumping up the price. Like, that's insane to me. And I think that happens sometimes with these kind of tweets. Like, consumers can, I think, take it not for what it is sometimes and conflate it into that kind of thing and be like, oh, let me go buy Josh Downs because he could be that in the right situation, in the right offense. And if Anthony Richardson is hurt the rest of the season, or if he gets traded, and it's like, let's just make moves based on what's actually happening. So that's what that also kind of led me to think. We have Lapisaurus in here. Shout out to the Discord. Are the slot wide receiver profiles, Wicks, Downs, Wandale, etc., the type of players that are benefiting from the cover 2 defense, focusing more on stopping the mid to deep threats? Should we target these more? Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's definitely an element of that. We should always be targeting players who we think can be successful out of the slot, would be my answer to that.
Yep.
Right? Like, all these guys, I think, are that profile, and we want guys who are working out of the slot because that's where the mismatches are, and on the right offense. And if they have, that wide receiver 2-ish role at least or above, then yeah, man, we're cooking. And I think you've seen that with Wandale, even in an underwhelming offense led by Daniel Jones. And then Downs, of course, you're seeing it when he gets a quarterback who can get him the ball, Wicks, etc. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's an element of that, and we should be targeting guys in those roles who we think have the proper upside, I guess.
And scoring format, I think, is really important. I don't think that they have as much value in
PPR,
half point PPR versus full point PPR. Just something to be mindful of. Tiered PPR, depending on how that's fitting in your league too, something to be mindful of. But yeah, I think it's a good point.
Yep.
All right. So, Billy, you got the Tortoise and the Hill.
Yeah. I was trying to find a way to frame this for like how I feel like I behaved, and I do feel like the tortoise and the hare, which is like a fable, I guess you could say, that kind of, the moral is about hubris and being a little too cocky and that kind of thing. And I had this situation, I just kind of wanted to think back on it. It's kind of a little bit of like self-evaluation, but earlier in the season, I got an offer that was Justice Hill plus a 4th for Jonnu Smith, and I kind of like, part of it was like, I'm smarter than this other guy. Like, I can get more for Jonnu, and like that whole thing. Right. And that's part of the self-evaluation. Like, you shouldn't do that to anybody. You know what I mean? Because like, you don't know, first of all, you don't know everything. This is a game of chance too. And so there's outside factors, but also you don't know how much work the other people are doing, and you don't know who you're playing with always. So to put that judgment on somebody and let that seep into your evaluations and the decisions and moves you're going to make is a terrible thing to do, and definitely something that happened to me here, and that was part of it. But it was also thinking that Jonnu Smith all of a sudden would become what we've always hoped he would be, that he's never proven to be, in an offense that really doesn't utilize the position. Like, I know that he comes from the head coach, the scheme comes from San Francisco, but they have an amazing tight end. And if they had an amazing tight end, they'd probably use him here, but they don't have an amazing tight end. We knew that, but still, I'm in my head, I'm like, yeah, Jonnu, like, he'll prove enough where I can get more than a Justice Hill plus a 4th or whatever. I can at least get a 4th, and Justice Hill is nothing. And that's also completely dismissing the fact that Justice Hill backup running backs are hot commodities all over the place, and we should be just piling those up. You know what I mean? No matter what you think of the player in a great offense. So it was just kind of, the whole thing felt like it was just cockiness, hubris. It was just me thinking that I was better and not doing enough work or just giving enough credit to the other side, to the point where I just made a huge mistake, I feel like, right? Because looking back on it, that's the killer deal. Easy, right? And I could have, if I just trade Justice Hill this week and I have that plus a 4th, probably more than I'd ever get for Jonnu Smith. And I think looking back on it, there's obviously a ton of freedom in doing that. And I enjoy that. Like, I do enjoy the ability to look back and say, like, I fucked up. You know what I mean? And this is why. But I also think that this could have been prevented. And I think all the things I said could have been should have been the way that we thought, and could have been the way that we thought back in week 1 or maybe I think it was off season when I got this, like right before the season started. I think we could have applied that thought process back then and it not have been crazy. Like, all of this stuff should have been at the forefront of our minds, but for some reason it just wasn't. And it was a total misevaluation. And it's just something I wanted to bring up because, again, the main point, moral of the story is, try to it's the opposite of hubris. I don't know why I'm, but try to, you know, not be as, I guess I'll just say not be as cocky as sometimes we are when we think we're really good at this game, you know?
Be humble.
Thank you. That's the word. Yeah. So just be a little bit more humble sometimes in your evaluations, be a little bit more humble in the moves you're going to make and kind of your thought process as you go through those moves, and not just be so, yeah, like I know what I'm doing. This guy doesn't, and I'm going to get this right. Like that's not a great place to be, in my opinion.
All right, Jake, what you've been waiting for here, bud? Where's your head at?
You know, it's funny that you say that, but before we jump in, we have Ben, past guest on the show. Shout out Ben in the comments. He just posted in the Discord a trade. It was one of our longtime friends, AJ, also known as Dale. He sent Cole Kmet for Mark Andrews right now in the middle of the show, and so Ben's asking, should he accept the Kmet? It's a great question, and you know, it really puts you in a funky situation of where things are at, and you know, we are asking, where's your head at? But I think we're 4 weeks in, and we're starting to, like, you know, constantly over evaluate and start questioning everything that we've ever done. This isn't the first time we've played Dynasty before, but yet this season feels like our first, or maybe our last. I don't know. It feels so pressurized, right? Doesn't it? I don't know.
No,
what's
I see so many people on Twitter like, oh, I think I hate fantasy now.
I'm not doing this again.
Like, it's tough on the mentals this year.
It is, and I love both of you guys, and I wanted to check in. So let's just do a sanity check right now. It's going into week 5. Where are we
Young
at?
man, it's not your last, Ben. It's not your last, all right? Oh my God.
So what have been some general pain points for the two of you so far as fantasy managers?
Like, I would just say it's hard. It's hard to do. If not getting points from Mark Andrews is what's been holding your team back from being I don't know, 3-1 instead of 1-3 or whatever the case may be, I think at some point you got to put your nuts on the table and go after the guy who actually is getting some volume right now. It's hard. It's so hard because nobody had Kmet ranked anywhere near Andrews a month ago. But now here we are. And it's kind of like at some point you got to, like, you don't want to be like overreactionary and like screw your team up, right? But I think that the cost is not that crazy. It's just like, this is one of the things where, like, I'm going to sit and be idle and probably be mad at myself for doing it, but I can't see myself sending Andrews for Kmet. But my brain says you probably should if you want to keep winning.
Yeah. No, I mean, like,
one more thing is just like there's no like probably any plus on either side right now, which is like the shitty part. So,
yeah. No, I mean, if you're like, if you are like a super contender, and I guess you got to fix it, and there's only one way, and it's getting rid of Andrews. Like, I'm sure this isn't gonna like destroy you. And Cole Kmet definitely seems like he's on the up in that offense. I truly believe that he's really, really developed well, and I think he's played really well this season. But yes, I am going full door on Andrews. Damn, that's hilarious, AJ. I kind of am, but I want to try to find a way to fix it without having to give up Andrews, just so I can hold that and not feel terrible with myself when it turns around. Truly, but God, very, very tough.
Make the bet, but risk something else.
Yeah. That's the thing. Like, it's not like Cole Kmet is like the safest option for either. You know what I mean?
No.
Like, if I'm gonna trade Mark Andrews, I'd just rather add something decent enough to get up to, I think, a more stable tight end option, which there are many of those right now, I guess. But I think I'd rather try to just tier up, or maybe get into like a Kittle and just call it a day, where it's like something I know I'm very comfortable with. You know, I think that's the kind of direction I would go in instead. Man, I hate that goddamn conversation, but What was your question, Jake? I'm so lost now.
No, you're fine. Yeah,
I'm so
I think bringing that up definitely like repositions the conversation. That's on me. I just wanted to shout out both Ben being in the comments, AJ for basically taking some of our advice and going out there and trying to shoot a shot. I respect the shit out of that. That's exactly what you should be doing. But realistically, the place that we're all in, it's week 4, or sorry, we just finished week 4. Just kind of where is your head at? Like, what are some general pain points of kind of the first 4 weeks, and what have you learned, or what are you kind of pushing yourself through?
Yeah. Shout out Jake. Shout out Jake. I love that. That song is such a throwback, and I hadn't thought about it at all until today. And wow, man, puts me in the mood for this conversation. But yeah, general pain points. Everything. Like all of my players are injured, and all of my players aren't scoring points. Those are my general pain points, dude. It's really tough. But like I was thinking about this before we hopped on, and I don't know if there's any one position outside tight end, of course. And my general pain point is Mark Andrews, because I have like 70% Mark Andrews. So it has been tight end. I don't think quarterback has been a very favorable position this year. Like, they're not scoring at a great rate, any of them really, even the top guys outside of Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson. He's scoring, none of his weapons are, but out of those couple guys, like, it's like nobody else is. Even the Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen has been up and down. It's been real tough. So that's been one of my pain points. The other one is, up until this week, it had been tough to really get some trades moving and ability to kind of fix any of these situations, or lean into a rebuild, whatever it is, because everybody was kind of holding. But it does seem like people are, the gears are starting to turn, and people are deciding which way they want to go. So I've gotten a couple of trades, moved some of these later round tight ends for future picks, because people are really struggling. So I've found my way a little bit this week, but that's I think where my head goes when you ask me that question. What about you, Uriah? Or I don't know if you answered this already or not.
Everything you just said, basically. I mean, I like this week I have a roster, I think. Oh yeah, JJ McCarthy was supposed to be my QB3. So I have just Dak Prescott and Jalen Hurts as my quarterbacks, which has normally been a really decent thing to have. Jalen Hurts is on a bye this week, and I put Kate Otten into my super flex, and like I'm at peace with that. Like I that I'm fine with that, and
the bye weeks are crazy.
It's crazy. It's like I'm like happy for these bye weeks, because it's like now, like, maybe some of these more healthy teams have to like make decisions that I've been making the whole fucking season. And it's like, I'm playing with my B team on all my rosters, and it's really pissing me off. It's been hard. I've found that my roster construction in one of my, I think it's DU3, is not good. I only have to start like one wide receiver, and I think I have like one that I could choose from. The rest are all running backs, and it's like a lot of frustration there. All my trade talks have just stalled. I haven't got anything done. Seeing the same guys I'm talking to, making trades that my trade talk stalled with, and then make a trade with somebody else. Like, that's infuriating. Like, what did I do? There's a lot right now. I'm not happy. I haven't looked at a single roster or end result this year and been like, yeah, I'm fucking killing it right now. Like, and I know everyone else is going through it, but it's like, it seems like it's worse for me. So,
mentally, I'm saying to myself, everybody else is going through it, so we're all in the same boat, just to make myself feel better. And you're like, not as bad as me, bro. Trust me, they're not in this boat. This boat's like sinking. Theirs is floating. Theirs is floating away. No, dude, like it's tough. But the other thing that you just said, actually, there's a couple leagues that this has been a struggle for, and obviously some of this is roster construction, but in leagues where I thought I'd be fine at wide receiver, it has been a struggle, bro. To like some of my lineups, I'm like, Lil Jordan Humphreys is getting in there. I'm like, I literally don't have another guy like on my roster to get it. I'm like, how? Yes. Like, I don't even know how that's possible. And then I go and look at my IR, and I'm like, oh, now I know how it's possible. But it's like, it just feels like wide receiver has been a real challenge this year to just like roster enough of them to to get out there in your lineups. I don't know. Have you felt similar things, Jake, or what are you seeing?
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of open honesty, some cathartic nature between the two of you. I feel like that was a really healthy process. You're welcome. No, but like in all sincerity, I think like the biggest thing that I've taken away is that like no one's really overreacting the same way that Twitter is. Like none of my leagues feel like anyone is just like, holy fuck, I got to get off this guy, just like I'm seeing on the internet. And in the past, I feel like I've been able to take advantage of that same situation. And I just haven't been as lucky with sending out trades for those types of players. And we talked about this a bit in the offseason. Like that's definitely one of my go-to tactics. Like I know there are content creators out there that people listen to. Taking advantage of their trade advice is one of those things that I want to basically move forward with. And um, I wasn't being sassy at all, which is hilarious. But I think like the biggest thing for me is, and I'll shout him out. Like I do think that he happens to be a really great content creator, but like Scott Connor, I think is a great content creator who provides some really fantastic advice, especially for portfolio players. But when non-portfolio players digest his advice, they make bad decisions for small scale fantasy teams. And he's a prime example of someone who I want people to be, ingesting that content to be like, I need to get off of Rashi Rice for, Jaden Reed. Like, okay, cool. Like, that's sick. You're muted.
Whatever. Or for pick and straight is what I was going to say, which is like the one that really struck me. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Like,
or for pick and straight, like if that's the mentality that we want to instill, that's totally fine. But I just haven't seen it. Like I'm seeing the content. I'm just not seeing people reacting like that, which for the community in general, I think that's great. Like I don't think that we necessarily need to take all of the information that we are constantly ingesting and then making it practice. We need to be using our own minds to be making those decisions, and we're really seeing that. But in that same vein, like I would really love to know, like, have player evaluations been more or less challenging this year with the wild point scoring variance in usage? And like, do you find that people are jumping to conclusions about individual players too quickly? Are we getting off of injured players too quickly? That's kind of where my head was at.
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes as a blanket answer for sure. I mean, I mentioned it kind of as we were getting out of the news and nonsense section, a little bit of kind of how we may have even done it as well. But like more than ever, I'm feeling like I'm not reading the market well for whatever reason. And like the Rice value drop is kind of one of them where it does seem like it's flipped where like I've taken place of like the Rice truthers all of a sudden and they all are Rice haters now. And I'm like, wait, what the hell just changed? Like, I understand that he has a significant injury and he's going to be out the rest of the season. He was going to have the suspension anyway, and then he'll be back and healthy. Like, these guys recover really well generally these days. There's always the risk that I guess he's not the same after the knee injury, but from what we've seen, it's been they get back to full strength, pretty well. And I'm not saying go out there and pay top 12 dynasty wide receiver prices anymore. You certainly don't have to. But, if I can send a straight 25 first for him, like that seems like a complete bargain. And I know that that is advice that's being pushed out there and people are just like, let me get off of Rashee Rice for just about anything. And so I do think that's happening, but also like, I feel like misjudging T-Law and me sending some poor offers. Like I was saved over the weekend by somebody who didn't want to pay their dues for next year. And I was like, thanks, because I sent you a horrible offer. And so, yeah, like I do feel like with everything that's happening and maybe the redraft mentality kind of seeping in too much, I am also doing that where it's been a little bit harder to evaluate things and I'm making it harder on myself maybe. And, you gave me some advice, like just stop sending some of these offers, like stop sending offers for certain players, like, or, to sell off of certain players who are, on the downtick. Like there's no reason to like force yourself into those things and do something that you shouldn't be doing. So yeah, I do think that it is a thing that's happening. So yes, is my answer. What about you, Uriah? Mute. Aha,
I agree with
not
most
just me.
everything. Yeah, you got the fish tank. But Yeah, it's just been harder this year for me, mostly because I had kind of said before, like I feel like I'm kind of rolling out the B squad there, and it's like, okay, well, who's the next man up? Who's the next man up? And it's really hard projection wise, unless, admittedly, I don't take anybody's weekly rankings and go through every one of my leagues, which maybe I should because people are putting in good work out there. Maybe that would help me. But when I'm sitting there like, okay, do I start Wandale Robinson or Darnell Mooney? And it's like, well, shit, like if everybody was happy and healthy on my team right now, neither of those guys would be making my lineup. They'd just be there just in case somebody got hurt or whatever. But now I have to choose between the two. And it's like, that's really, really, really hard. I chose Wandale just because he's playing on Thursday. I'm like, well, there's somebody I could watch tonight. It's hard. For me, are we jumping to conclusions too quickly? I am not. I definitely am more of a passive manager than I should be. So I worry a lot about letting these things by without correcting it before it gets too bad. On the other hand, I'm an optimist. So I'm like, okay, well, Cooper Kupp's sitting there. He's going to be back. Hollywood Brown, he's back at some point. So I'll just keep him there. When in reality, it's like, well, shouldn't you be moving those guys who are scoring points? But I just worry that in like 6 weeks when Kupp's balling out and I got a replacement player that's scoring some points for me, he's not scoring the same amount of points that Kupp is. And then go back and forth and the wheels just keep turning and I find myself just like, I don't know what to do. Like it's like cruise control right now. Just throwing guys in there that I think are healthy, but deciding who to play over who right now has been a lot harder for me because AJ Brown's out. Right? It's like, okay, so
Yeah.
okay, well then Cortland Sutton, who's normally on my bench, he's starting for me now. It's like, what the hell am I doing? Like, it doesn't feel right. It's making it harder. And I know I sound like I'm a whiny or whatever, but it's difficult, right? It's where you go into the season where you have like your squad set up, you're going to have some injuries, but like, there's just been a few where it's like, man, like I'm really struggling here to figure out who the hell I want to start out of these quote unquote scrubs, but I need points. So it's been hard. And are we getting off injured players too quickly? That's the thing. It's like, I think that oftentimes people do, but it might be the smart thing to do because we are not doctors. We don't know exactly when these players are coming back. There's a chance that we never see Puka play this year. It's possible. It's possible you never see Christian McCaffrey take a single snap the rest of the season. That's very, very possible. But you hope he does,
more
right?
likely than the other one, yeah.
Right. So, well, I'm just saying. So he's sitting on your IR, or you're going to hold on to him, and he's going to come back, and everything's going to be great. But what if it's not? So it's like those moves that like you need to make. It's becoming very, very hard for me to actually make any of those moves.
Yeah, that's really great. Honestly, I'm proud of both of you. This is a lot to work through, and we're getting there. We're getting there. We've only gotten through 2 questions so far, but I did want to just kind of tackle your most recent point, Uriah, and I think you honestly brought up what I believe is the dynasty versus redraft dilemma. Like Puka Nacua is a perfect example of why you don't need to sell low in a dynasty landscape unless you can truly get somewhere near true market value to prior to his injury, or else you keep him. Like there's just no need to, I guess, tier down to get points, in my opinion, or that means that your team build is just not particularly good. And then that's the other issue. I'd much rather use a future asset personally and buy with that future asset than kind of tier down from Puka if I believe that Puka is Puka. Now, with Christian McCaffrey, on the other hand, as soon as there were murmurs about him having any type of injury in the preseason as a 27, 28-year-old running back, I'd be more than happy.
28, 29?
Old enough? That's terrible. I would be more than happy to sell him then, right? Like, I think that's the great juxtaposition of like how we look at the assets themselves and like how I want to personally break them down. And when I asked this question to myself, like, have player evaluations been more or less challenging this year with wild point scoring variance and usage? I would say it's actually the usage that's really, really frustrating for me, because that's what I typically buy into aside from tape, is just like generalized usage of individual players. It was one of the major reasons why I loved Rashee Rice last year when Uriah and I were on without Billy. I spoke basically to it. When usage grows, it doesn't even have to be point scoring, but true usage, like player on field, that means that relationship is going to grow. Another prime example of this, and I'm surprised we haven't talked about him all that much at the beginning of the year, but Eric All is literally doing this right now in Cincinnati. Eric All is the perfect example of someone who, if you see the window, because the window is growing, it truly is, he's the guy. You got to go out there right now and buy him from someone who might not know what they have. Like, that's it. You're going to lose that window of opportunity way too quick. And if you can make that opportunity on someone like him, and you can get off of someone like a Bucky Irving for a first, that's kind of the small margin games you can play in this game immediately. And then that kind of gives you that extra shopping power that, let's say, God forbid, there's another Cooper Kupp injury. Now I can get off of Cooper Kupp later in the season, plus that first I just picked up for Bucky Irving, and now shop for whatever I need to replace those Cooper Kupp points. I don't feel as bad about losing Cooper Kupp. Like, that's kind of the way I think we need to be looking at this game a little bit more, rather than like, Puka's injured and should I be getting rid of Puka? No, because you're going to get fucked on Puka's value, I think is the sad reality. And that's just kind of how I see it.
It's a little bit of the Mark Andrews thing too, right? It's like not on the usage side of thing, but on like, if I need points, like, I'm almost never going to use my injured stud to go and get what I need, because often you're not going to get the dynasty value in return or the points in return. Like, you're going to get a couple of guys who may get into your lineup, who may in combination give you the points, but probably not. And so I really want to avoid that. The usage thing also made me think of Jordan Whittington, because his usage ticked up after we called him Jordan Middington all last week. Me as I listen, you took part.
I was present.
I heard you say Middington.
I defended him in saying that his usage was too low to compare so far. That's all.
I think Jake was definitely sharp on that. I think that was a really good. I think you dissected it really well last week. But to your point, like, that usage is going up, and those are players you do want to grab onto, and you do want to focus on usage. But this year has been a struggle in terms of usage. And Mark Andrews, again, is the perfect example of that, where it's like, we have years and years of like steady usage with this guy, and all of a sudden it's not there. So to your point, like, it's been really tough to gauge like what's actually happening and who's doing what. And it does seem like we're in like a whole new landscape than what we've been in the last couple of years. It just seems like a lot of stuff has shifted, and we have to shift with that, and we have to address it, acknowledge it, and move forward. So that's where we're at with this right now, right? Like, it's, man, it is a challenge.
Yeah, let's move forward. So we just talked about one of the most precarious profiles in the injury landscape, Cooper Kupp, right? I think Cooper Kupp is now probably forever going to be bandaged up, and Christian McCaffrey probably, as injury-prone players. Have these player injuries impacted your willingness to dive into other profiles that are quote-unquote injury-prone, just because other players have been getting injured?
Not for me. This is where I find an edge sometimes, right? Is like, people really want to get off the injured players, or think that they're injury prone and that's going to continue on their entire career. And I guess I'm just not someone who prescribes to that, really. And I believe that there's going to be a year, a stretch. There's going to be time where these players are healthy. It's rarely is it like something genetic with them. Like, sometimes that does happen, like Todd Gurley, probably the knee thing, like degenerative, that just wasn't, it wasn't happening for him, and it was bound to happen eventually, and based on all the usage. But I think that, those situations, first of all, like, we have so much more injury insight and health data. Like, we might be able to even get ahead of that now. Like you're saying with like the CMC thing, even just hearing murmurs of, Achilles, anything, right? Tendonitis, that's okay. 28-year-old, like, let's get out of that. But those are specific situations. T. Higgins, I think too. These kind of players, like, I'm just not worried about the injury stuff. I'm going to continue not to be, and I'll buy the dips when they're there personally, and that's how I feel about it.
The only thing I'll push back on is, because we heard it before with you, with Christian Watson and the Dontavian Wicks thing. Like, do you see like players in that? Like, I know you don't own Christian Watson. You've always kind of been relatively off of him, but that idea, or to like push on that narrative of like,
sure,
we should be patient with Wicks because of the fact that Watson might get injured is still kind of the same generalization. You just don't happen to own that asset. So how do we get off of that kind of mentality, I guess, is the way that I look at it.
One thing I would say is this injury is not like the other injuries that he's had. Yeah. He got rolled up on, right? So it's not like it's a soft tissue or like his hammy, pulled up or whatever. But also I think that my point really more than just Watson was there was multiple paths for Wicks to become what we wanted him to be in that specific situation. So yeah, like I do think that I would have and may still buy into Watson a little bit here. Like if there's a significant dip, like this may be where I do get a share or two, because I do think that he's I think he's a good enough player. I do think that they may have gotten the injury stuff figured out with his hamstring and all that stuff. So I'm not totally off of that profile necessarily either. Yeah, cool. That wasn't the point. That wasn't the point, really.
fair. I just heard words and I jumped and I asked questions.
No,
what about
you,
right?
I don't mean to say that it wasn't a good question.
No. I didn't take it personally. Don't worry.
It was a good question.
I think Billy pretty much covered all I was going to cover. Just like I go back to the was it Edwin, the physical trainer, and injury prone thing. So after listening to him and his research, like it doesn't scare me off of injured players. Although Anthony Richardson, like I just want him to have like 3 good games in a row so I could sell his fucking ass. But other than that, no. Injuries happen. You can't predict them. I don't think anybody's actually injury prone except for Anthony Richardson.
Fair enough. We all have our one, right?
I like how we're scared of Edwin's last name, Edwin Portis. Like, come on, let's get him out there. That's who he is.
I in my head, I was thinking Diaz, but like that's not. Yeah.
Injury prone podcast though. That's his.
Yes.
I think that's the podcast. It's pretty good. Like I think he gets out the injury information pretty quickly, and I like how he dissects things. I think he does it really well, and he does it kind of database. So it's pretty cool stuff. Go check him out.
Sweet. Thanks for the shout to Edwin. Last but not least, diving into where we are at, our mental health. Where's your head at? Has anyone in the group noticed or seen anyone trying to antagonize or instigate their own micro markets in their leagues? I was thinking through this and I saw it recently in DU3. Our buddy Joe, probably one of the sharper dudes in the Discord. Shout out to you, my man. Started making some crazy moves in DU3. He had what was truly a productive struggle year one, racked up a ton of rookie assets over the next few years, and found himself into a situation where he was able to trade Rome Odunze in 2 firsts for CD Lamb. And then in about 6 days, sent out JJ McCarthy, Jonathan Brooks, Xavier Worthy, Tucker Kraft, a 25 first, a 26th fourth for Sam Darnold, Nico Collins, Jake Ferguson, and Devon Achane. Now, that second trade, I do realize, is a lot to kind of process, but just in general, thinking about the number of assets that are moving between these 2 trades, we have close to 14 assets in in those 2 trades. How does that now impact the way the rest of the league is going to operate? Seeing basically a team that was realistically rebuilding still in year 2, now probably competing as one of, if not the probably most realistic contender in the league. Has anyone seen anything else like this? Have either of you tried doing anything like this in your leagues?
I have.
No, it pisses me off.
Good.
That's it. No, basically, Joe probably caught most of DU3 sleeping. And fantastic work by Joe.
Yeah, part of this requires somebody having quite a few firsts or quite a bit of capital to move off of, right? And obviously you have to kind of look around and see what the other teams are doing and say, okay, I can reasonably get into the mix here. I think that is rare to be able to do within a season, to be able to go from straight rebuilder to contender, though these pieces he added are certainly doing what he's trying to get done. I do think that he's moved himself into the contender position here. I saw this happen in one other league. I saw it happen in a Devi league, but that doesn't really matter. A team got beat, and basically they said they would have been like 2-2, and they went to like 1-3, and they basically were like, I know I'm not winning this league. Like I know I'm not winning this league. I have a lot of good pieces. Let me just completely shift out of this competitive mode I'm in and go straight rebuild and just like dive. And what I've seen that do, and maybe this is to your point, and what we should be doing in DU3 is going and attacking that manager who's now shifting, because generally they're selling kind of low on the assets that whatever they've switched to, the opposite. So if they were rebuilding, like the rebuilding stuff is now acquirable, right? Like it's much more acquirable. Or, the person who is now gone into rebuild, maybe they have, Brian Robinson and Chris Godwin, guys who have plenty of life left in them, but they're like, I need to get off of these guys and I just need to get capital back. So I'm willing to take, minor, they're willing to take hits on the dynasty value just to get these deals done and let the rest of the league know, like, I'm open for business. You know what I mean? So more often than not, you need to recognize this, and as the other manager in the league, attack, I think, that where they're going fast, because like other people are going to jump on it. Like, like this happened between these two managers, a ton of assets just shifted over. And now all those assets are probably like off the market. Like you're going to be unable to trade for Nico he just got them. Like he's not trading them, right? So a big portion of the dynasty market is now no-go. So you need to find where those I guess windows are to go and attack. But like also you should be looking at other fringe managers, because this probably has kind of rocked their world as well, and try to start having some conversations, right? Because like some of them are gonna be like, oh shit, he went full competitive mode. Like maybe I was thinking about that, I was in the middle, but now I'm shifting to rebuild. You know what I mean? So you need to start having some conversations with the rest of your league mates. That's really where my head is kind of going.
You're picking up what I'm putting down. I would say that these types of moves will continue to impact the rest of the landscape of your league. And to your point, Billy, it's like, it's not the two teams that are participating in the trade. It's now the reality for so many of the other teams that are participating in the league that now know, damn, I might not have a shot at all this year. Like, the way in which trades impact others isn't always a 1-to-1 ratio. And it doesn't mean that you need a 3-party trade for it to have a larger scale impact. Every trade that occurs, especially by a singular owner, has larger scale implications to the rest of the league. And that's kind of how I see it. What about you, Uriah?
Yeah, I mean, basically, yeah. I think what I'm more upset about is the fact, like, I didn't really notice that these two trades went down by the same person, and the effect that it could have on the league. The fact that you pointed it out makes me feel like I am sleeping a little bit too much in these leagues. Yeah, I mean, it's a big move. It's a big move. This impacts everything. This is probably one of my favorite teams before the league started, or before the season started, and it's putting me in a situation now where, I feel like I need to do something like that. But see, the thing is, what he did was he made this move before anybody else did. I think, generally speaking, we think about wait till week 4 and then evaluate your team. Well, he did this sooner than anybody else did, right? So he's able to get Darnold, Nico, Ferguson, Achan. He's able to get those at prices cheaper than they will be in a couple weeks, right? So even for those guys that are on the fence but looking to compete, and they say they have capital to do so, like, it's only going to get more expensive as time goes on, when people are like, they know they're out of it and they could hold, or these players are performing and they're just simply worth more. He got in early on these, earlier than everybody else in the league, and I think he's going to benefit greatly from this. So really all I have to say is, like, hats off to Joe for this, because that's a lot. It's a huge upgrade that he did.
Yeah, and I think just one of the things that's really sticking with me is when two big trades like this happen by the same person, and especially when they're acquiring high-end assets that have some dynasty, like long-term dynasty value. Again, they've taken so many players off the market. Like he's very unlikely to trade these guys, at least within, the next 6 months, let's say, right? At the very least, and maybe even after that, like these guys are going to be hard to move. And if they do get moved, they're going to be individually probably not packaged up and cost more than what he got them for. This also is one that, like, when these big trades happen like this, where you get like Nico, A-Chain, Ferguson, like that whole thing going, and I mean both of them in combination maybe, but really when those happen, you really got to remember which manager took the rebuilding side and was willing to take a loss on some of those players to rebuild, essentially. Like, oh, I'll take JJ on IR or whatever. I'll take the rando first. I'll take, in a combo. Like, you got to remember that, first of all, for short term. Like, go and see if there's a move you can make with them where they're willing to take, some rebuilding assets for a little bit lower than market to kind of lean into that rebuild. You know what I mean? And also for the future years to come, if they're in that situation again and they have more assets that you want, them, same thing. But it just kind of the when those get done, it's not always 1-to-1. Like, it may have just been like the perfect storm for them, but sometimes they will make similar moves. This goes back to like the Leo P kind of, tracking league make tendencies thing. Yeah, it's just one of those that you notice kind of. There's a couple people in the DU leagues that have made some rebuilding moves where they're not bad, but like they'll take like a little loss here or there to get a deal done. And I'm like, okay, like they're willing to do that. That's something I need to clock and try and send some offers and have some conversations, because you can get something done.
Definitely. I think all in all, that was a really awesome conversation. I now know where both of your heads are at, so I'm going to take advantage. But seriously, I think that was one truly like a very honest conversation from both of you. So I highly respect that. I think everyone who is listening and will listen is going to learn a lot from it. Maybe they might not have the same feelings, but hopefully they're having the same conversations with themselves and asking themselves, like, kind of where are they at? Like, are they handling the things that are happening right now in their leagues properly? Should they be starting to look at the moves that other people are making? Should they be the Joes in their leagues and instigate and change the landscape of their leagues? And I would say to that latter question, yes. Like, try and always be ahead of the game before the game starts moving in front of you, because then basically everyone else is going to be adapting. He was able to find 2 deals that basically changed the entire landscape of his team. And by doing so, kind of found both of them at a relative discount without me, diving too deep into those deals themselves. With that being said, I did have one other section. It's kind of a tangential point to this last point, and I wanted to just talk quickly about how you can manipulate player value. And this is specifically about a first-year Dynasty player in one of the DU leagues. He picked up a orphan. Shout out to Sam, also in our Discord. He made some incredible moves for Rashee Rice. And I just want to talk a little bit about Rashee Rice's just player volatility, or his value volatility this year. But back on April 25th of this year, Sam traded Zay Flowers for David Njoku and Rashee Rice. Already smash. Absolutely killed it. Then I think he realized on September 6th, his team build just didn't really make sense to have Rashee Rice for whatever reason, and decided to kind of break down Rashee from what I think he was trying to go into is rebuilding. And so he traded Rashee Rice and Aaron Jones off of his team for TJ Hawkinson and Bo Nix. I think the idea there was to help kind of propel his quarterback room a little bit. September 6th was right before the season started. So, or maybe it was the night of the season starting. So people were pretty hot and heavy about trying to improve their teams. And then here we are. Rashee Rice has a pretty major knee injury, and Sam decides to now make his 3rd trade with Rashee Rice in the span of 5 to 6 months. On September 30th, he got Rashee Rice back for Derrick Henry and Chris Godwin. Now, in a dynasty landscape, you could probably say that that's equivalent to 2 firsts because of just general player output. But I think in the grand scheme of things, Derrick Henry on his build was a depreciating asset, regardless if he could have gotten a first for him right now or not. And Chris Godwin, probably relatively in the same boat as a 28-year-old wide receiver. So in full picture, from Zay Flowers, he was able to get David Njoku and Rashee Rice. He then added TJ Hawkinson and Bo Nix, got off of Aaron Jones. And then he got off of Derrick Henry and Chris Godwin and got Rashee Rice back. So Rashee Rice, TJ Hawkinson, Bo Nix, and David Njoku now sitting on his rebuilding team. I just thought it was a really, really great set of moves to kind of manipulate Rashee Rice's really, really high ceilings and really, really low lows off of these kind of tumultuous times with injuries, especially because we were just talking about it. Like, here's what you don't do with Rashee Rice, in my opinion. And to answer kind of your question, Uriah, like, this is exactly what I wouldn't do in Dynasty, is trade Rashee Rice for Derrick Henry and Chris Godwin, knowing that my value window for both of them as a contender is so minimal. And it puts my team in a really, really unfortunate situation if things go awry. One Derrick Henry injury, and this looks like one of the worst trades of the year. So how do we kind of move around this as other owners and kind of use the same type of ideology and help our teams?
Man, they're like, this was really cool. Watching it happen was really cool. The Derrick Henry Godwin trade, like, you broke it down really well in my head. I'm like, I wonder if he could have gotten more separately, but like, that's again a dangerous game to play with a 30-year-old running back. And also you want to get those points off your roster if you're trying to rebuild, and you know that makes a lot of sense. And so yeah, I think this was really heady, but I think it's more about, because like, I don't think you can take the situation 1-to-1 with like another player necessarily, because there's so many specifics. Like, he probably made one of these trades when like the news broke about him in the car accident, you know, or the car accident or whatever. And then another one when he started, you know, doing really well. And then another one when he gets injured. So it's really about, which we talk about often, is finding those windows, those peaks and valleys, right, where you can trade for or trade a guy away, and again, this is a big part of it, not hold on to players because of their name, because you know, pre-draft bias, like, you really like this guy, whatever it is. Be willing to move off of these guys during the peaks and the valleys for plus, or you know, to gain those edges. And I think that there will be windows where you can buy them back. We literally saw it happen here. I've done that with a number of players. I feel like, you know, thinking back to like an Aaron Rodgers, buying low, selling high, like those kind of things. And you can reasonably kind of predict those windows or see those windows happening with certain players. And I think Rashee Rice has such a clear trajectory down the road. It makes so much sense to buy into him now. You know what I mean? And it made sense to sell him when he sold them and buy when he bought them. So it's about finding those peaks and valleys and being discerning about it, because it's tough. It's not like every one of them you're going to get right, or every one of them is a perfect 1-to-1 like this, but that's what it is. He read the situations right. He's paying attention, and he's willing to make these moves, right? And that combination of factors makes for a great process, in my opinion.
Nailed it. Before
we move forward, I do want to throw up a comment from Ben here. I told him I'd do it in a second, like 40 minutes ago. But So here it is. No, goes back to kind of our Mark Andrews conversation. He traded Mark Andrews away, said this caused a real stir in the league chat. Tyreek, Devontae Adams, to be clear. Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, and Mark Andrews for Jaden Reed, a 25 first, and Kelsey.
Sure.
I'll tell you what, that's how you get off of Mark Andrews, in my opinion. I actually think that's a pretty solid trade. You know, Adams declining asset. Yeah, Adams declining asset. So I think getting, like, if you break it down, like getting a first for him, money. Reed for Hill, like, not perfect 1-to-1, but I can see it going forward. Kelsey for Andrews, like, I can't blame you for doing that. You know what I mean? At this point, like, I really can't. I think you still got a couple years out of Kelsey. Obviously, we see without Rashee Rice, he's going to be totally fine this year. Yeah, this is a crazy trade. I as if I was the owner of the Reek Adams Andrew side, I definitely have a hard time making this trade. Like I would, because they're like Jaden Reed is not a 1-to-1 for any of these guys at peak. Like he's just not. You know what I mean? But he's awesome. Like he just is, and he's on a great offense in a great situation. So this is a cool one. But I think if you can do something like this makes some sense to me. Like it doesn't feel like you're giving up too much dynasty value here. You're actually getting some really good dynasty value in return, and you can remain competitive while doing this. What are your thoughts on this trade, Jake?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It goes against a lot of my ethos, and maybe this is where I will end up losing a lot of these battles. Personally, this is the type of trade when I see it, I'd rather try and break it down with other pieces. So like if I'm really trying to get off of Devontae and I really want that first, like I'd probably go like Devontae and, like a week ago or 2 weeks ago, Carson Steele, and go up to the first. And I think that that's totally those types of windows that I can do that.
Adams and Zach Moss for the first. Yeah.
Yeah. Like that type of mentality. I find that there's a lot of meat left on this bone. We have already gotten kind of hints at Tua coming back by week 8. It's like a resurgence of Tyreek Hill, even at 31 or 30, like you're going to see a value loss here, I think, in general. And this goes back to some of the, ideology and thought process I was trying to kind of call to heads before, is like, if the assets themselves are not showing any reasonable decline and they're being impacted by other things, I don't see why we need to necessarily get off of them in this way. If that 25 first for whatever reason is early, then I'll eat chow and shut the fuck up. But assuming that the team that is now acquiring 3 aging assets is probably contending, I'm going to guess that they will try and contend this year, and therefore the first is probably late. I just don't really see it. I get it. Like I get the general thought process. It's just like it's just not something for me, and that's okay. I'm fine with that.
Yeah. What do you think about this trade, Uriah? Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Mark Andrews for Jaden Reed, 25 first, and Kelsey.
I like the first thing you said was like, if you're going to move up Mark Andrews, like this is the way to do it. So I like that. I like it. You're really packaging 4-year-old guys. Probably the team that's sending away Tyreek, Devontae, Andrews really thought they were competing 4 weeks ago. And now they're in a situation like, well, shit, I can't wait any longer. It's just not happening for me. So you have to try to shit or get off the pot. Me, I'd be sitting here a year from now with those players still on my team like, man, I really should have sold them. I think the return is probably pretty good. Honestly, Devontae, I have no idea what's going to happen with him. Age-wise, who's going to be throwing the ball? What's going on there? Like, out of all those assets, like he's the one I'm worried about the most. Tyreek is just a Tua problem. Tua, I think, will be back. And then Andrews, hopefully he's just who he is, right? Like, it's like they talk about in baseball. When you acquire a player in free agency, you're just hoping they're going to be like the baseball card, right? Mark Andrews' baseball card is really, really good, right? His football card, like, so you just kind of hope he comes back to what he's done his whole entire career.
Hold that card, baby. That value's coming back.
I like it. Jaden Reed, 25 first. Kelsey, it's pretty good. Although Kelsey, Andrews, what's the difference at this point? I don't really know.
One is being targeted, the other isn't.
Well,
six
I guess
years.
now. Yeah, now. But yeah, age as well too, right? So it's really tough. But I think this is kind of what you got to do if you're sitting and you're doing what we kind of preach is after week 4, week 5, you kind of want to be one of the first in your leagues to kind of make these moves. If you're really starting to look at your team, because we don't know what the injuries and other things that the Tyreek team is dealing with right now. Just makes sense for me. Like, hey, if you really are not going to be able to see the end of the tunnel, there is no light. You can't wait to move these players. Now is the time to do it. So I totally get it.
Yeah, great points all around for sure. I do think it's funny though, because if a contending team is right now trading those pieces for Tyreek, Devontae Adams, and Andrews, that's not really helping a competitive team Short term, I mean,
Well,
you better
what if
have
they're
like
just like,
a
hey,
lot of depth.
the baseball card situation, they're like, this can't continue. They're
Sure,
gonna
but like,
regress to the mean, right? They're taking it. It's a big bet, right?
but like, okay, what I'm saying is like for a contending team to be waiting until week 8 for Hill to get back right, for Devonta Adams to either find a new team or get uninjured all of a sudden, and Andrews to get right, which like Andrews more to me seems like a longer term play than shorter term. And when I say longer, I mean longer into this season. Like it's just weird. Like the team that's getting the points is the Reed Kelsey side. Like they just are. So it's a strange one to me to think like who's getting what here, and also taking on the 25 first. Like I'd be like, yeah, like maybe you aren't going to be as competitive as you thought, and that first is going to be a little bit higher. So like the deal kind of makes a little bit of sense to me to lean into the Reed side. And as much as I do see Tyreek Hill definitely coming back to form by end of season with Hill there, the rest of it I'm just so concerned about, honestly. And so I do see I think I would lean into that Reed side a little bit. I would love to know more about that first, where that first is, whose first that is, because that does matter a lot. But yeah, that's a super interesting trade. Thank you, Ben, for bringing that to the show. I think that was a good conversation to have. Okay, so yeah, we're gonna dive into one under the hood topic, and then we'll get into trades and non-trades and get out of here. I think we can do that.
Sounds good. Right. Underdog, under the hood. What we're thinking about when we should be thinking about our wives.
That's what I'm talking about. Nailing it.
I think I used that one before, but hey,
you can use it every time. It's timeless. Absolutely timeless.
Love you, baby.
It's gonna be a quiet night in the Dawkins household.
It's fine. We got like 21 years together.
There you go.
Oh man, that's amazing. Very impressive.
Bro, to trick the same lady into staying with you this amount of time.
It's impressive.
Genius. I don't care if I ever win another league.
You deserve a Nobel Peace Prize, bro.
Thanks. Yeah. It's the Abram Accord. All right. So can we start thinking about startup values yet for this year's rookies? If so, what does this exercise provide us? Are we still valuing players based on ADP during the season, or other means of valuing for trades?
Oh man. You go ahead, jump in, Uriah, if you want.
Yeah, just generally, this is something that I always say. I mean, I've said year after year after year, like when we're in it, I'm really looking for points. I'm not going to totally ignore like dynasty value and age and all that stuff because that matters, right? But man, who's scoring points right now? I'm always trying to win. I haven't ever been trying not to win, although at DU2, I'm trying really hard not to win, but nobody wants to trade me. But right now, I'm just looking at like weekly production, weekly usage, and those types of things. I haven't really considered at all startup value for any of these players, like Brian Thomas Jr., even like a guy like Leggett. Like, I'm not thinking about like where they're drafted or what they're doing. I'm thinking about what they're doing on the field right now. ADP, I don't give a shit about ADP right now whatsoever. I don't care where they were drafted. I don't care where I got them. A guy like Bucky Irving, 4th round, I don't care. That doesn't matter anymore. Bucky Irving is ascending asset. He's scoring points. Like, I don't care like when you got him. Like right now, I'm trying to see like what are these points worth to me, and what am I willing to spend to get those points on my team right now.
Yeah, I guess
it. Like,
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No.
Okay. The only
am I in the wrong?
No. I just think it's a little bit directed the wrong way, and I just wanted to kind of reposition it. So shout out to our buddy Paul Patterson at Paul Patterson FF. He tweeted, "There are 3 rookies that already belong in the first round of Dynasty startups. None of them are named Caleb Williams." And now, the reason that I thought that this tweet was interesting is I wanted to understand what's the value to this exercise? Like, why are we already thinking about next year's startup values? Like, how does that help us in the long game, the long con of us playing into the 2024 season? And to your point about, competing and contending and wanting point scorers, I think that makes a ton of sense. But I'm actually trying to dive a little bit more into like, and maybe you did answer it there, which is completely fair, and I think it made a lot of sense. But like, how are we quote unquote valuing players? And is it truly, to your point, right? Is it by point scoring? Is that like from, asset to asset? If I'm comparing Tyreek Hill, negligent or negating his age, he loses so much value because of his actual point scoring output versus Brian Thomas Jr. Like, am I willing already after 4 weeks to trade Brian Thomas Jr. straight up for Tyreek Hill? I think would be a good conversation when that would not have been, I think, a thought prior to week 1.
You mean Hill for Brian Thomas Jr.?
Either direction. Sure.
Yeah, but I think that was the point. Yes. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. We might go through another 4 weeks of Huntley throwing the ball to Tyreek Hill. Like, Tyreek Hill can't fix a quarterback that's not good. How many more weeks can you go with getting an 8 in your wide receiver 1 spot anymore when you have a player like Brian Thomas Jr. doing very, very, very well for a rookie, even with a kind of a shitty quarterback and scheme, and that's all beside the point right now. I think that's a smart move, honestly. If I had Tyreek, I think I'm looking to go to get BJT and pray I could get something extra. But even if I don't, I think I'm comfortable with that based on not only dynasty value moving forward, but also the points that are going to be scored moving forward the rest of the season.
Okay, so nobody said anything wrong necessarily. I don't know if there's any wrong answers to this, but so to your point, Jake, maybe I'm doing it wrong a little bit here because determining Caleb won't be a first round pick this early is slightly reactionary.
Oh yeah,
right?
I skipped all that. But...
No, that's not even. It's not even doesn't matter. But I do think that the way that I am doing it is definitely if you're looking at KTC, in a way, I do think that is looking at future startup values. It's just changing week to week based on what people are thinking, but it is kind of the rankings at the end of the season are going to be basically what the startup values are, right? It's not really ADP. I do agree ADP's out the window. Don't really care about that. Try not to think about it as much when you're making trades. Oh, this guy was a 4th round pick. If I can get a second, who cares? You know what I mean? Don't want to necessarily think that way, but yeah, so I don't necessarily want to think that way. I'll leave it there. In terms of the startup value thing, I do think that I try to, when I trade for a player, I'm trading for a player. I am trying to, in the evaluation, say he's going to be in this range in the future, in a startup compared to where Hill will be, let's say a Tyreek Hill, he's going to probably slowly edge down the dynasty rankings, the startup rankings next year, right? He's not going to be where he was likely this year, age, maybe performance, whatever it is. So I do think the best way to do it is to have right now, I think points matter a lot, but I do think the startup value should be a part of the evaluation of the player when you're making trades, acquiring players, whatever. Yeah. That's how I feel about it because, and not that you can determine exactly where they're going to be startup value wise. And this early, it's definitely harder to do. But if I'm trying to make a trade for Brian Thomas, let's say, I do think that his trajectory can be reasonably predicted. Not exactly where he's going to be, but I do think we can say based on what he's doing this early, based on, his role in the offense, the pick that he was in the NFL draft, the draft capital, all these different factors, he's reasonably going to be in this range of startup value. Plus he's offering me this amount of points so I can make X trade where I'm trading away Hill for Brian Thomas, whatever, you know what I mean? Whatever that looks like. But that's in my brain, how I'm working through the decision-making process. And I'm 100% trying to gauge where they're going to be in the future. I think we have to be. I don't know. How do you feel about it, Jake?
Yeah. So I guess the better question is, are we conflating or comparing the usage or process of creating, our own dynasty rankings as that of our future projections of startup value? Is that a 1-to-1? So if I'm updating my rankings after week 4 and I now have Jayden Daniels as my QB3, does that mean that I think he's going to get selected as the 103 next year? Or does that mean that I think that his value right now in week 5, going into week 5, is equivalent to QB3, and he sits there at the 103? Like, those are two different processes for me. I don't think that they're the same because, for instance, this is a great example. Anthony Richardson last year, right? Anthony Richardson got injured after 3 or 4 football games, and yet for whatever reason, his valuation completely skyrocketed, plummeted. And then in the offseason, it got brought back up. So like this exercise for me feels a little fruitless because I don't think it's a one-to-one comparison. I don't think that when we go through this process, we're even being genuine because there's so many other factors that participate in it. To your point, Caleb Williams, a rookie quarterback who has played 4 NFL football games. We don't know what the whole landscape of his rookie year is going to be. If he gets injured in week 5, it's going to deeply impact his fantasy value and, this quote unquote future ADP or his future situation of where we see him falling in the next year startups. But like, does that actually have any value to you with regards to your own analysis of him as a player?
Not him as a player, but him as a dynasty asset. Like, I guess I disagree a little bit on the process of the rankings a little bit, maybe because like I don't think that I'm like adjusting my rankings going like at some level, obviously you're adjusting them to the current market, but like to your point, if like Anthony Richardson, like last year, Anthony Richardson got injured, like I don't think it is doing the process justice to just drop him significantly down the rankings, like so far, knowing that he is going to still be the asset he is. He just got injured. He's going to be the starting quarterback. He still has all the upside in the world. Like he should still sit in a similar range, still lower than where he was, obviously, to adjust for the market and account for the market. But I do think that like the rankings should, like dynasty rankings, I feel like there's a difference between dynasty rankings and weekly rankings for like redraft, sit. Like, and that's where my head is going. Like, I think if you're doing dynasty rankings, it should be trying to reflect what their value is going to be long term and over time, not necessarily what it is now, next week, the week after that. Like, if we're doing that, we're not really doing dynasty rankings. In my opinion, we're doing redraft rankings because like that's what they are at that point. We're basically going off of points more than anything, which matter. But yeah, I think we should be trying to get as close to our thoughts on what the long-term asset is going to be and where they should sit within our rankings. So yeah, I do think we should be thinking about startup values for rookies.
All right.
For every player, I think we should. I just think sorry to keep this going. I think that our evaluation of the players should be that long-term view, not a short-term outlook. And that's where I'll leave it, I guess. And that, in my opinion, has to include that startup value.
Okay. Yeah, I think this was a really good conversation, and I appreciate both of your feedback. I think in general, the way in which we approach the game is going to be, different. Everyone should approach it differently. And we always talk about like, what's your edge going to be? Your edge is always going to be how you value the players. If you go one-to-one with KTC, you are just everybody else. So however you are going to, manipulate player valuations in your own head, whether that's through advanced analytics, whether that's through tape, whether it's through everything that's available on God's green earth. Like, there are people who do that too. If it's through player or like competitor tendencies, like who's in your league and what they're doing and how can I manipulate those situations, whatever it might be down to, like that's how you create the edge. I think that these conversations are really helpful for us just so that we genuinely tell each other like how to best evolve as players. And I think that's kind of the general practice. So thanks for the honesty.
Awesome. Let's knock out a couple of trades before we get out of here.
I got a couple trades. So trades, non-trades. We have preseason trade revisited Sam Darnold plus Terry McLaurin plus Hollywood Brown for Tyreek Hill.
Wow.
I mean,
I hate whoever put this here. I don't like you at all.
I did it.
That's terrible.
I just remember
okay.
this trade went down and the person who traded away Tyreek Hill got absolutely roasted. And now
this was League of Legends.
It was.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
I roasted him. I remember.
It's looking pretty good right now. I mean, we'll just, these are one of those trades like at the time was bad and probably still on the surface is bad process.
Yes.
But boy, did it work out. It really worked out. So I have nothing else to say. It's going to get even better when Hollywood Brown is off of IR. So shout out to whoever had the crystal ball.
Yeah, this is just pure luck. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to put this in here is to kind of highlight that sometimes bad trades do equate to good trades, what you think is a good trade, but it's all about, to Uriah's point, is process. This is a terrible process. And just because you hit on it doesn't mean you should ever do it again. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. But I just think that this is just not the way to go about things in a dynasty landscape, especially when the trade happened. I don't even think Sam Darnold was announced as the starter, which is the craziest part. Like the fact that this person sent this trade out, not knowing that Sam Darnold was for sure going to start week 1, it's just preposterous. But to Uriah's point, maybe we should be reaching out to this guy and be like, what else is coming in the future? Because they might be able to see into their crystal ball.
I'm convinced, like the person who made the trade for the package was a former wide receiver, and I'm convinced that they have an affinity for wide receivers and getting multiple that they think are really good players. Like even if they're not like high-end fantasy assets, like they think they're good players. Like that had something to do with it, to be honest. And I think Sam Darnold was just a kicker for them, which is even crazier.
He's a quarterback.
Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah.
It was a bad.
No. I get it. Yeah. No, it was good. I also made a bad Scary Terry trade this season as well, this off season. So yeah, that was one, man. I really feel like I botched the evaluation on that too, where it's like he's the wide receiver 1 there, and if we believe in Jaden Daniels, then he's gonna be just fine. It wasn't really that hard to come to that conclusion, I don't think, but nonetheless, we can move on.
All right, next one. Kate Otten, who Jake hates, plus a third for
Dan hates too.
Second.
No tight end premium, 1 QB.
And then Tucker Kraft for a second. So Otten in a third for a second. I like it. You're getting Otten, who I think is probably going to be a second round rookie pick value by the end of the season. And then Tucker Kraft for a second. It is what it is. I'd rather spend a third, but hey, here we are.
I think I just think in no premium, these are not tight ends that I particularly want anything of. I just want elite tight ends, and spending assets on these types of players just doesn't really make sense to me personally.
I actually ended up getting the second. I have a ton of tight ends in that league. Like I actually have both Otten and Kraft. And I only traded Otten. I just wanted to see kind of what you guys thought about both of them. And Kraft is an interesting one. That one's a little bit tougher to just go the second because I do think that he's a pretty good player, and he has basically established himself as the tight end 1 there, and basically just
backup tight end.
What's funny is like we talked about this a while back, and I was like, I don't understand the Luke Musgrave stuff because he's not a well-rounded tight end, and this is literally what I said back then was that Kraft is a well-rounded tight end. He's a big body guy. He can catch the ball after the catch, all that stuff. Also, he can block. So I'm actually pretty interested in Tucker. I think it's a harder one to do. Otten in the third for the second. That one I got the second on that, and I'm pretty comfortable with that. So yeah, those are interesting ones because it's right now everybody is searching for a way to fix tight end. And these guys are kind of it. In a tight end premium league, I think Tucker Kraft wins that out pretty easily over the second. But yeah, anyway, we can move on.
All right. Juwan Jennings for 25 third.
Give me the third.
Yeah, I mean, if you need the wide receiver, I think that's what you got to pay for him. If I have Juwan Jennings and I don't need to actually start him, I'll just take that third.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't believe Juwan Jennings is all of a sudden Brandon Marshall. So I know that that's like basically what the eval was coming out, just like lighter Brandon Marshall. But man, I can't believe all of a sudden he's like figured it out and he's going to be this going forward or for any other team. So no thanks on that. I'll take the third. Jake nodded his head as well. What about Jalen Naylor? I think I spelled his name wrong. Jalen Naylor for a 25 fourth.
Sure, either way.
I'll take the
right.
fourth. I'll take.
Yeah, I mean, if you need the wide receiver, you
don't need that wide receiver for anything.
I'm just saying, whatever.
I promise you can spend your fourth better.
It's fine. It either way. I'm not like, yeah, I don't care. It's fine.
It's like Josh and I did a trade in one league with like I don't even know who the fuck Trey Palmer for 2 fourths. It's like
I saw that.
Sure. I'm okay. I would love those fourths. Thank you for sending them my way. If that's what you want to purchase, by all means. I do think it's cheap enough, and there's a window I think for his value to slightly skyrocket. Jalen Naylor was a sell week 2 after Addison got injured. Like, I don't know why is this trade happening now?
When Addison is back, I'm just kind of shocked that got done. But also with like the Trey Palmer thing, like just the way I think about it, especially with 2 fourths, I'm like, well, I'll just get another Trey Palmer with one of those fourths next year, I guess. Or like I can trade that fourth for another Trey Palmer type player and have a fourth in my back pocket. It's just like they're not gonna like they're such spot starts. It's like there's no point in taking those guys on. It's like just spend the extra capital to go get Darnell Mooney, or go get Jordan Whittington instead for that pick or both picks or whatever, a third and a fourth. Like that's okay, one more. What's this last one?
I think this happened in DU4. I think it happened yesterday.
Oh yeah. This is a good one. Oh,
it's a pretty big trade.
And
the only reason I know is because one of the people who participated in it was DM me about it. Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jermaine Burton for Garrett Wilson, a 25 first, and Rashad. I have no value Bateman.
That's good. I think I actually talked to you about this one, Jake. This one's a little tougher. Like I still have some belief in Garrett Wilson. I have a feeling that 25 first is not going to be late. Not saying it's going to be early either, but I don't know if it's going to be late. So I don't hate that return for Amon-Ra St. Brown, but I'd still go the Amon-Ra St. Brown side personally.
Same. Garrett Wilson's first 4 weeks with Aaron Rodgers has not turned out the way I had hoped. So I think this is a situation where, I think it's actually kind of cheap for Amon-Ra. So I'll take Amon-Ra.
Yeah, I think I'm like on the outside, compared to you two on this one. I think both of you think it's kind of a cheap deal for Amon-Ra now.
Yeah, and the worst part is I'm pretty high on Garrett Wilson too. I acquired a lot of him over the last 12 months. I just don't see the reason of getting off of Amon-Ra for this, unless you do think, to Billy's point, that this first is more lucrative than the person who's selling it thinks it is. And that is part of the game. I think that this first 4 to 5 week window is when you can take advantage of people who, Dynasty Daddy calls frauds. The Dynasty Daddy calls frisky teams, like those teams that think that they're contending and aren't. This is where you go. If this first ends up being like the 104, 103 somehow, like you look pretty good finding yourself probably at wide receiver 2 or 3 in this upcoming draft, knowing that there's going to probably be a running back somewhere in the top 3, and then it's going to be Tet, Luther Barden, and I forgot the guy from Ole Miss. Might be up there. There's a few different folks.
Why am I not thinking of who? I don't know why I can't think of that one.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. It could be a Mecca. It could be anyone. Regardless, there are just so many potential outs that if it does land, top 3, 4, you look good here. But if it does land, like the 109, 110, I definitely want Amon-Ra. It's weird how these types of trades I do think are like so dependent of where that first lands. Most trades are, by all means. And to Uriah's point about trading like really, really far in the future picks, not having any idea about how your roster is going to be constructed, it does put a lot of ambiguity in these trades. It's like, well, a singular first could be the 101 in 3 years, right? But this is in 2025, so we should be able to know generally what those teams are doing. But yeah, maybe the person who's acquiring Garrett Wilson sees a little bit more writing on the wall than the person who's acquiring Amon-Ra. I don't know.
All right.
Yeah. All right. Real quick, sorry.
About?
Yeah, there is one more thing. Sorry. If you want to get out of here, I totally understand. And we've been going for a while, but I actually did tell somebody we were going to talk about something on the pod and we didn't. And I don't want to do that to them. So somebody tweeted at me.
Okay. I'll let you guys handle it.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have a great night.
You too. Peace. Appreciate you, brother. Okay, real quick. I did want to get some other thoughts on this, but so somebody tweeted at me basically, Dynasty strategy question for you. I'm in the opinion that an important part of Dynasty is maximizing all value resources, which in my Dynasty salary cap hybrid means using all your tags, all your cap, all your fab, etc. Question, if you have a super team, to what degree should you be trying to sell productive players to free up roster flexibility? For example, like after the draft, there are a bunch of guys like Jordan Mason, Kraft, Brissett, whatever, just sitting on the waiver wire, but I didn't have any drop fodder. I would say the answer is to package to tier up, but no one wants to trade a premium player to a super team unless they can gouge you. Curious for your thoughts. From my perspective, the toughest thing about having a super team is resisting the urge to make moves just to make them. And then he posted up his roster of a really, really good team here with like Breece Hall, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Devontae Adams, Sam Laporta, DK Metcalf, J-Mo, James Cook, Caleb, and Gino, and a whole bunch of other really good assets on the bench too. Odunze, Jaden Reed, like definitely.
Brian Thomas, Dalton Kincaid, like it's pretty stacked everywhere.
Would definitely consider a super team. So I gave him some feedback on the Twitter box, and I will kind of echo what I said, and maybe we can get into it further. But I wanted to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think this is one of the hardest parts about kind of manipulating micro markets, right? Like we always talk about being able to try and kind of leverage your way into places where you can potentially take on additional value. And I guess to at JABUFU, Jabufu, to their point, I think like it's really challenging to operate in a league when other managers see your team as a super team. And I think personally, I would much rather kind of have the super team than go after the Jordan Masons, the Tucker Crafts, and the Jacoby Brissetts for the sake of hoping for that upside, right? Like if you picked up Jacoby Brissett, what were you really going to get from him? If you're having that difficulty trading off of guys like a Devontae Adams or even a Dalton Kincaid, or trying to get, high-end premium off of these types of players on, micro windows, if you're having difficulty trading them, what makes you think that you would have been able to take advantage of Jordan Mason's value is kind of the way that I
none of us can take advantage of Jordan Mason's
value. For fuck's
sake,
no one will take him from me. I'm like dangling the stick with the donut, and they're just like, yeah, keep it. And I'm like,
here's 2 donuts.
I'm like, fuck, I'll give you something else. Just please take him. He's scoring too many fucking points on my shit team. But yeah, I think that's probably my best advice is like, it sucks to lose out on Jordan Mason, knowing that he is performing well right now. It sucks to lose out on the Tucker Crafts, but like, where on this roster do I see you potentially making that move earlier in the season? I just don't see it. It's just like, everyone there has value. I am assuming you probably didn't have Cade Stover, but maybe like a Cade Stover or maybe getting off of the rookie hype from Kamani Vidal, right? Like these would be the windows that I would see. And obviously I think the obvious ones are the older players that are in the starting lineup, even the Jameson Williams. Like it's not because I'm necessarily saying to get off those profiles, but like Billy and I spoke about it during the off season. It's like the likelihood for him to have that third-year breakout was so low that if there are people that are super into him, maybe package someone like him and Devontae together and try and not even necessarily tier up. I'd be willing to lose the trade and move sideways on Devontae's value, truly, and maybe get like a small plus, like a third or something like that off of it. Even if it's a shit trade at the end of the day, I think like that would be kind of the way in which I'd be moving around some of those types of valuations, especially knowing that this is a salary cap league, which does move a little bit of the needle.
Right.
I think
That
getting
doesn't
off
matter.
of Devontae's salary probably would help. So yeah. What about you, Billy?
Yeah, I think we're on the same page here. We're definitely speaking the same language. So let me just I'll just read what I wrote back to him. So one of my main dynasty tenets is don't trade just to trade ever, period. Number one. So if I have this team, I'm like, I don't really have any need to do anything necessarily unless it's helping me. But also, I don't want to move my studs in the name of clearing space for waiver ads or anything really. Like there's almost no justification for moving a stud off my roster unless it's gaining dynasty value or something along those lines. I see plenty of ways to add to this roster outside of tiering up, which is definitely the first thing I would like to do. If anything, of course, I would like to try to tier up from some of my players, but can we move Adams plus Spears for a first, or wait for Adams news to shake and get a first for him straight? Or can you move JMO plus Moss to tier up? Do your best to add high-end rookie picks to a super team, which allows you to continue building on the foundation. And I think that's the key there is like when you have such a good team like this, like I don't even necessarily want to add more players to it unless I am literally tearing up in some form or fashion, because they're not going to get in the lineup. You're struggling to get Brian Thomas and all these great players in your lineup. Jaden Reed, 31 points on your bench. It's like you don't need to add more. You need adding picks to these teams to me is like the key to keeping the rest of the league down. If you can add picks to this team, like if you had 2 first-round picks on this team, like not only can you make incredible moves to tier up, actually, like people will actually buy your tier ups. Like, oh, Devontae Adams in a first, like, yeah, I bet somebody will take that to give you, some player from their rebuilding team. But it's like, if you have multiple first and you actually can hold on to them and you go into the next year, like now you're going to add players to your roster that people absolutely want. And that like, you know what I mean? And so now you just have all this flexibility, and you have this ability where you basically have a farm team on your bench. Like you don't have to trade for many players. You have all the guys are just kind of, anybody on your team that's aging out, you have a replacement for, and you can really, the goal should be get ahead of the Devontae Adams stuff, right? Like you should have been trading him maybe last year or during the offseason and really pushing buttons, trying to get, that first round value back, which is not always easy. We get that, like totally get that. We've bought Devontae Adams for second, so I understand the value has been low here and there, but I think that's too low, and there was plenty of opportunity to get out of him. Also, when he had a good game or two early in the season already, you know what I mean? He did have like, before this injury, I think he had like a 17-point game or something like that, pretty high target game. Like there was windows, I think, to get out of him. And granted, he's saying the league market is pretty stingy. Understand that. That's why I was offering some suggestions on combining some of these players, like you're saying, taking a little loss maybe, where it's like, yeah, Devontae and Spears for a first is kind of taking a loss, but like, is it really in the long run? I don't think so, especially for this team. It's actually a huge gain for you with the liquidity and everything I'm saying. So I think we lose sight of like the packaging. Also, JMO, 2 catches, 70 yards and a touchdown. Like this shit's not sustainable. I just don't care. It's not sustainable. Get rid of these kind of assets. When you have Brian Thomas, Odunze, all that kind of stuff, like you don't need to hold on to JMO. And right now is the perfect time to package him, like Jake was saying, with either Devonta, Spears, who just had a decent game, any of these guys, package them and move on. You don't need, with this team, the last thing you want, in my opinion, are players that you have some uncertainty about week to week, right? Like you don't know if JMO's going to hit every week. He needs that one big play generally. Otherwise, it might be a down week. You don't need that in this lineup. You have other players that can go in there. Find a way to churn those guys out. So, yeah, that's what I would do with it. And super teams are tough, man. You do have to fight the urge to just like make trades because sometimes it feels like it gets stale and boring. But trust me, like winning never gets old. So just keep winning.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add on top of that is like the best thing about creating a super team is basically making sure and leveraging its feature. So like when you see those individual sell windows for players, try and get out of them as best as you can, knowing that you already have, excessive depth across your bench. Like, there isn't a singular asset on your bench that you wouldn't be comfortable starting aside from like Drew Lock and Cade Stover. So it's like, feel confident in the way in which you've constructed the team, but also make sure that you're setting yourself up for success moving forward. So you don't have an asset that just dies there. Like, you have that opportunity and ability to basically make sure you never do. So take those tiny, tiny losses and just make sure that you're stacking them up with true liquidity, because the loss there is much better than seeing Devontae die on your team, right? Like, that just isn't feasible for me in a team like this. You can technically take the hit because you have that space, but I just don't see why you would when you can easily slot in a Brian Thomas Jr. into your starting lineup for him tomorrow, right? Like, just I think that's kind of the way I see it. But all in all, amazing work. Like, I think we haven't shouted it out. Like, that is a beautiful
Props
team.
to that.
You've done an exceptional job. I know you brought the question to us, and thank you for that. Just wanted to say, like, amazing work, and keep on doing what you're doing, because it's obviously working in that league.
Absolutely. Definitely echo everything Jake just said there. With that, we've almost put in another 2 hours for your listening experience. I love it, honestly. People love this shit. And if you don't, then you're not a degen and you're not for us, I guess. I don't know what to tell you. That's all I got to say. But I do want to say, shout out to Jake. He really put most of the sheet together, and the topic around where our head's at. I love the framing. I love the topic, and something that you were saying during that segment. I think all of us here, but definitely, I definitely want to speak for myself here, but I do think all of us feel this way. We take pride in our honesty, like being honest and being vulnerable and all that. Like, I think that's kind of the best content. That's the best way to do this and actually give out the best advice. So, that's what we're all about here. And so appreciate Jake for bringing that to us and giving us a platform to show that and showcase that. Is a really good one. With that, Jake, thank you so much for being here, brother. This will close out another one.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. All right. Thanks everybody for listening to this week's episode of Dynasty Underdog. Check us out on Spotify. Check us out on YouTube. Subscribe. Hop in the Discord. If you can't find it, just reach out to me on Twitter, on YouTube, wherever. I'll get you in there. Doesn't matter. We'll find a way. Follow us on Twitter at Dynasty Underdog, at Uriah Dawkins, at Willie Beeman FF, and at Jake Abrams. That will do it. We'll catch you next time. Peace out.